Commercial authoritarianism. The US is expected to significantly escalate restrictions on Chinese EVs under the guise of national security. On Monday, the Commerce Department proposed banning quote-unquote Chinese software and hardware in so-called connected vehicles. The proposed ban not only affects Chinese EV makers, but also forces other major automakers to remove Chinese components from vehicles before they can enter the US. This comes just days after the Biden administration locked in a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs and 25% on EV batteries. Why is the US effectively moving to ban Chinese components in EVs? Has the US abandoned its beliefs in free trade and the free market? Is it really about national security, or is it creeping commercial authoritarianism? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Liu Xin. I'm pleased to be joined from Shanghai by Josef Mahoney, professor at East China Normal University. In the studio by Gong, vice president of the University of International Business and Economics, Israel. And from Brisbane, Australia, by Warwick Powell, adjunct professor at Queensland University of Technology. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. First of all, let's find out exactly what this is all about. Let me start with Joseph. Exactly what this executive order is about, and what kind of impact will it have if it passes?
Well, I think there are 5 key points to make here to sort of frame this conversation, and I think my colleagues on the panel will agree. First, Chinese EVs have been politicized as a national security issue. Now, Chinese EVs do not directly pose a threat to the U.S., as the U.S. government alleges, but the success of Chinese EVs bolsters the Chinese economy and outcompetes U.S. car makers, 2 outcomes the U.S. wants to avoid. Now, the U.S. is a hegemon. It wants to maintain its privileged position in global affairs. It does not want to contend with China as a true competitor, politically or economically, and this includes being compelled to work with China cooperatively with some degree of mutual recognition and respect. Second, there's a persistent narrative in the U.S. that Chinese EV manufacturing has achieved so much overcapacity that even 100% tariffs are not enough, that Chinese companies might even be willing to sell at losses due to alleged state subsidies, that the Chinese side wants to plant these products in the U.S. even if it amounts to a financial loss, because it will give them the opportunity to grab market share and crush potential competition, and thereby open the opportunity for future profits, or more ominously, put devices in the U.S., which the U.S. government has previously alleged could be weaponized by the Chinese government as enemy drones or merely for spying purposes. Now, third, we've had the appearance...
Joseph, yeah. Keep your points for the time being for now. Let me go to the other guests before we get too much information in our hands. John, what is this executive order about? What they're trying to do?
Well, first of all, let me say that this order is clearly motivated by the recent pager attack that happened in southern Lebanon. So there's this speculation about devices containing elements that can be manipulated to cause damage further down the road. Now, what this order executive order from the Commerce Department is about is regarding communications modules, typically in a car. That's why they are talking about connected vehicles. And these devices were used for communication. These days, a lot of cars have communication modules.
What exactly are these connected vehicles?
Well, I mean,
what are they talking about?
I think they're talking about cars connected with 4G and 5G technologies. Usually there's a box in a car called a T-box. The T-box serves as the communication function. In other words, it communicates with the cellular network and sends information from the vehicles to some servers in the cloud. But let me also point out that this T-box thing, the critical component of this T-box thing that's responsible for telecommunication function is usually called the RF, the radio frequency baseband chip, which is mostly manufactured by an American company by the name of Qualcomm. As a matter of fact, as I know, in China, for example, the high-end cars, the largest market share of the baseband chips is actually coming from Qualcomm. So in my view, anything that tampers with telecommunications has got to be coming from the chip. So it's actually Qualcomm that's responsible for this telecommunication function. So I think they're climbing the wrong tree, in my view.
Okay, Warwick, what are they talking about when they're saying connected cars? Because it's a vagueness there, right? Are we talking about autonomous vehicles? Are we talking about self-driving vehicles? Are we talking about legacy cars that have functions such as Wi-Fi, such as Bluetooth? What are they talking about? What are they covering?
Increasingly, motor vehicles today are really computers with wheels. Compared them to motor vehicles 20 years ago, which were, engines and mechanical engineering. These days, we're looking at incredibly sophisticated electronic devices, which captures an incredible amount of data to enable diagnostics to be run on the engine performance and the maintenance status of a whole range of the components in a motor vehicle. And of course, progressively, this kind of data is feeding into the capacity for cars to be autonomous, they drive themselves, and to have a whole range of other safety features built in. So I think that that's broadly what we're talking about. I think the fundamental issues, in addition to the ones that Joseph and John have mentioned, really goes to two things. One is that the United States has, over the last 2 decades or so, significantly weaponized global information telecommunications network infrastructure. And that's largely because the United States and major big tech corporations in the US have controlled the critical pipelines of data through undersea cable and satellite technologies, together with the data centers that actually capture and process data. About 60% of global data flows goes through data centers in Virginia. The second thing is that this push against electronic vehicles or electric vehicles is largely at the behest of a combination of big oil and the big 3 Detroit manufacturers. They received $800 odd million of bailouts 12 years ago. They failed in terms of their own moves down the technology, the electrification.
All right, we are having a freezing moment with Warwick's signal. But anyway, let's go to Joseph. Joseph, I want to get the fundamentals correctly. They're talking about so-called key software and hardware. What does that include? What is key? What is not key? And when you talk about hardware, what does that mean? If a screw on a car, is that a key hardware or is that just any hardware? How are they defining it? Is there a definition?
Well, again, I don't think we've seen a clear definition yet. I think what we have seen is merely the opportunity to create yet another negative story. Now, I disagree with John a little bit. He says that this is a response to the pager issue, the pager attack against Hezbollah. But in fact, and certainly that's something that provides a fortuitous context for advancing this scare tactic in the United States. But we've seen step by step these policies being advanced against EVs that are not necessarily Chinese EVs that are not necessarily based in any sort of reality. I do concur with Warwick that this is about the U.S. trying to maintain its position as a hegemon in data and information flows. But at the same time, this is also pandering to voters in swing states, including Michigan, where the automakers are based. And at the same time, we know that this will be the first presidential election where AI and social media and algorithms play a powerful role in influencing the final vote. And there's a need to have this drip, drip, drip of information that is constantly feeding those algorithms to those audiences that want to hear something about the Biden administration or the Democrats taking an aggressive stand against China. So there isn't much substance in what we've heard from the Commerce Department.
This is getting outrageous because, again, there are so many vagueness in this executive order. If you're trying to cater to your voters, okay. But is this one, to me, is so bizarre. For instance, Chinese-made software, hardware. What about a Chinese joint venture car maker in the United States that's run by, that's invited by China, that's run by Chinese engineers, by hiring American workers? What about this kind of cars, John?
Yeah, well, first of all, no, let me first say that I think the Patriot tax is used as a pretext. I totally agree that there's something else behind this. If you look at the press release from the White House, the last paragraph in that press release, it's very clear. It was boasting about protecting American auto industry. So it's very much a presidential election elected, with respect to the key state of Michigan. I'm totally in agreement with that. Now, with respect to the exact product definition that's covered under this this order, it's actually not ordered yet. It's actually asking for public comments, and within 30 days, it's probably going to turn into most likely it's going to turn into an order, executive order that's going to be enforced. Now, the exact definition, in my view, is actually quite vague. It's probably going to be finalized later, within this 30-day period. But this, Joseph is absolutely right about one point. There's not much substance about this executive order because there are not going to be a lot of exports to the United States under this category anyway. I mean, they're talking about two things.
Right now, there's not many.
Well, not going to be in the future as well, I think.
Because you also have the South Korean car makers, you also have the Japanese, the Germans, who are making cars and using possibly Chinese-made software or Chinese hardware. What about those cars? Is the United States also banning those? And it says kind of the cars that are made in Mexico under Chinese joint venture will also be considered Chinese-made.
Well, I mean, these Chinese cars made in Mexico are not going to cross the Rio Grande River, in my view. The two categories of products covered. One is, of course, the cars themselves. As we all know, less than 1,000 cars exported to the United States every month. So it's a very small amount of cars anyway.
Right now,
the second thing is about the modules, the products, the software and hardware. As I said, it's a communication module that's responsible for communication as well as things related to autonomous driving, for example. And I don't think that many cars made in the United States are actually using this kind of a module manufactured from China. So I think it covers not a very large amount of trade in this case. Certainly it's motivated by a presidential election political reason.
Joseph, what is your expected, or what do you see as the definition of key Chinese software and hardware? Do you think this is going to be clearly defined?
Well, again, I'm not an expert in the technical side, and we don't yet see a clear definition. But they're not seeking a clear definition. If you look at 30 days, 30 days puts us about a week before the election. So then we'll have some sort of news story that comes out just ahead of the election to once again sequence this negative story for the algorithms feeding people who want to hear anti-China content. That's what's happening here. But then there's also a second issue, which is we know that China right now is working with Europe to try to work out some sort of understanding on how to ensure that Chinese EVs are produced in a fair way, because Europe has not bought into the ideology or the anti-China containment strategy with regard to Chinese EVs. And in fact, Chinese EVs have a more substantial market position in Europe. But what we've seen is that the U.S. has consistently tried to poison the water. Certainly, it was able to do this with Huawei in Europe, with some key European countries, and likewise TikTok. And so there's a secondary or a tertiary objective of trying to influence, I think, a global opinion and certainly European opinion as China is trying to work out and reach an understanding with European countries so that these EVs can move forward in Europe.
Because I think there's a dangerous trend in there, in that the United States is just rolling out one after another of these kind of either tariffs or executive orders. And that's why I started my program calling this commercial authoritarianism. Basically, they're deciding what can be available to the American consumers or not, whether the consumers will buy buy Chinese car is one thing, right? But to deny them the choice is another. The United States is always talking about free market, let the markets decide. But it seems that they have gone away from that completely almost. John, what is your comment?
Absolutely. I think the broader context is that the United States is just broadening the definition of national security with respect to trade. It used to be a champion of free trade, and now it's not talking about free trade anymore. It's talking about fair trade, and now it's talking about secure trade. So you go down that path. It's turning the North American market more and more isolated, in my view. I think one of the images you just showed in your program reminds me of one possibility that may have a major impact. That is BYD. BYD actually has a factory I think in California, southern Los Angeles.
That's the beginning shots.
Right.
The one that actually I visited.
Yeah, absolutely. So you know about this story. So they actually are making electric cars, electric buses, actually, not cars, buses, in Southern California, catering to the North American market. And I think that's going to be affected because these electric cars got to be connected. I mean, it got to be having a communication module. I just can't fathom a scenario that doesn't have that. And that's certainly Chinese, right? So what do we do? What to do?
Well, we don't know. We don't know. Maybe they're sourcing from the American market these software, these hardware. But this company is invested by China, right? This company is managed by Chinese managers together with American managers and mostly staffed by American workers. Right. So will that also come under this kind of ban?
Well, the current order clearly affects their business, in my view, right? I mean, look at the wordings of this document. Clearly, it covers the BYD case for the factory in Southern California. So hopefully, they may provide some kind of a solution, maybe an exception or some ad hoc exemption clause, to exempt that. Otherwise, I think that business could be in jeopardy.
All right.
There's no way they can do that without violating this order.
Let me try to ask you this question. I understand the concerns of even the U.S. government about further job losses in the legacy car sector. I understand the legitimate concerns about national security. What would the United States like China to do so that you can work together and two sides can win? Warwick, do you hear me? Seems that Warwick doesn't hear me.
The United States would lock China to one locked
yeah,
25
well,
years. So.
Try
Yes,
again,
Warwick.
Can you hear me? Yeah, go ahead. Try again.
I can hear you.
All right. Sorry, Joseph, would you like to try to answer this question? Yeah. Joseph, would you like to answer the question? What can the two sides do? What does the United States want China to do? Because clearly the United States is shooting itself in the foot by banning Chinese EV technology.
I think what we have to be very clear here is, there's this question about whether or not the U.S. Is really trying to decouple, or whether or not it's trying to simply make itself more secure. Now, I think. It's absolutely clear, given the trends that we've seen under the Biden administration, and we should assume that they will continue, whoever is elected in November, is that the U.S. wants to cripple certain aspects of Chinese economic and political power, but retain China as a source for some goods and as a buyer for some U.S. products, including agricultural goods. So the U.S. is not looking for a complete decoupling, nor is it looking for a real relationship where cooperation is going to somehow facilitate China's upgrading its use of advanced quality productive forces.
So, Joseph, you're actually saying the United States would like to have free trade so long as the United States is on top?
Well, that has always been the case. Even when the U.S. was talking about free trade and when it was, having this very, very positive relationship with China, it was, exploiting the Chinese labor. It was exploiting the Chinese environment. And then once China was ready to stand up and move to the next stage of development, the U.S. said, wait a minute, we don't like that at all. We don't want to compete with you. We don't want you challenging our hegemony economically or politically. Yeah. We don't want you to emerge as a major power. So that's where we are.
Warwick, let me try again to get you online. What can China and the United States do to resolve this issue? Is there any way to sit down and talk about it?
Look, I think at the moment, particularly in the lead up to an election, it's going to be very, very difficult to have rational discussions. And both sides, and certainly from the China side, will need to be a little bit patient until the dust settles in November, see who forms an administration and see what Congress looks like. Ultimately, I think that there is a lot of common when we think about the objectives of both countries, which is to create viable industries and jobs and employment with good paying jobs, clean vehicles, travelling the roads, contributing to joint efforts on climate change and carbon reduction. So there's plenty of high-level common ground. It's just going to be a case of letting some of the emotional heat come down, and election times, of course, is a terrible time to have those kinds of discussions.
So you don't think the United States you don't think the White House is actually very serious about banning the so-called key Chinese software or hardware?
Look, I think the Biden White House has been very serious about trying to cobble Chinese technology and Chinese enterprises, and has progressively created bigger fences or bigger walls. And or not, for instance, if there is a change of administration, a new administration would have the same kind of approach, is a little bit unclear, only because we know from some of the words of former President Trump that he's open to Chinese enterprises establishing manufacturing facilities in the United States, manufacturing these latest technology EVs. So there's possibly a window of opportunity there. The last thing I'll say is that concerns about data really are issues that should be effectively managed by technology regulators. And the fact that the United States regulators are using this particular issue as their leverage angle or as their rationale really speaks to a lack of confidence in the ability of their own technical regulators to administer data flows. After all, the data would necessarily flow over United States-owned infrastructure, whether it's fibre optics infrastructure or satellite infrastructure, through American-owned data centres before that data, in whatever shape or form, ends up anywhere.
John, you want to jump in here?
I agree with Warwick's first part of his last statement, but vehemently opposed to the second part of his last statement. The United States has the most sophisticated technology managing data, regulating data, making sure that data is secure and safe. So this is just a pretext in my view. Think about what happened in China. Tesla is the largest seller of electric cars here in China. All of these cars are network connected, and they generate tons of data, and we have a way of regulating the data flow, making sure it doesn't violate national security requirements. All of these can be done. If the Chinese government can do this, I'm pretty sure with the sophisticated technologies coming from FBI, from CIA, they can definitely do it.
It's and not the big tech companies.
Exactly. It's not about technical incompetence. I'm pretty sure this can be done. I think it's a protectionist agenda in addition to presidential politics here. They don't want to see competition in the United States. They're trying to protect American automakers, which in my view are totally lagging behind in a space of electric cars and connected cars. This is about protectionism, this is about presidential election politics, and there's nothing to do with technology, nothing to do with national security in my view.
Warwick, you want to react?
Yeah, and look, that's precisely my point. You know, it's either that they have no confidence in their own ability to actually manage these so-called data risks, which, like John, I don't believe that there's any grounds whatsoever for there to be no confidence in the ability to manage it. Therefore, it's something else. And as I said in my earlier comments, I think it boils down to, obviously, the dynamics of electoral politics, but it's also the commercial interests of big oil and big auto, who have, a lot of good reasons from their own point of view to stymie the growth of EVs and continue to promote and support the market for EV vehicles.
Okay. Time is limited. I want to ask this question: if this executive order does get, passed, and if it stays beyond election, whoever is in power, come the new president, is it going to benefit the U.S. auto industry? Is it going to save the U.S. jobs? Is it going to help give the time and space necessary to foster the U.S. EV industry itself? John, you want to
very briefly, I think in the short run it does, but in the long run it's going to create a big problem for the United States. It's going to turn North America into what I call an island of ice. In other words, it's going to be an isolated market full of ICE cars, internal combustion engine cars, and totally lagging behind with the rest of the world. Someday, let me tell you, someday, American people are going to go to Mexico and try to smuggle a car into the United States. Think about that. Think about that scenario. They can find more advanced, better cars in Mexico.
Cheaper.
And cheaper, of course, and then try to smuggle back into the United States. That's what's going to happen if this policy is going to consist.
Joseph, your take?
I agree with John. U.S. automakers have been suppressing EV technology since the 1970s in a conspiracy with the fossil fuel industries, and they're far behind. There were reports that one of the leading automaker chiefs came to China and participated in the teardown of one of the Chinese cars. And it's not just that they're green tech, it's not just that they threaten that side of the business, but also that they're incredibly well designed, incredibly efficient in terms of how they're produced. And in every respect, the U.S. automakers are behind.
So is this going to protect the U.S. auto workers, auto jobs?
In the short term, yes. But, U.S. automakers have long been dependent on their ability to sell internationally, not just domestically. And what we will see is that their global market share will decline.
Yeah, another thing I want to add is that ultimately it's the American consumers actually bearing the brunt of the cost of this. Today, cars in the United States are already very expensive. With policies like this, with the lack of competition, they're going to be more expensive down the road. And American households who are currently struggling are going to pay, $30,000, $40,000 for cars in the future. And so the American people are going to lose from this policy.
Powell, your take?
Yeah, look, if you're in an incumbent auto manufacturing business or you're in big oil, this move is something that you'd welcome. If you're anyone else, then you'd find it to be concerning in both the short term, but especially in the medium term, where this policy in effect denies your market and your country and your community access to new technologies, cleaner technologies, cheaper technologies, which ultimately delivers a higher standard of living. This policy won't do any of that.
What I wonder is, look, for the past 40 years, China adopted Western technology, Western standards, Western expertise, know-hows, and China obviously didn't have the kind of national security concern. Right now, there are a lot of Tesla cars running on Chinese streets, a lot of iPhones that are being used in China. If Raimondo is right that cars these days are like an iPhone on wheels, that China has also a lot of concern on national security, but China is not rolling out anything like that. Why is the United States doing that, John?
Well, I mean, the theory is actually based on hypothesis. In other words, this is some...
paranoia.
Absolutely. It's an argument based on that this can be potentially done, which China has never done. I mean, even against Huawei, they've been accusing Huawei for these things, but so far, as of today, there's not a shred of evidence currently surfacing, that shows Huawei has done anything remotely close to that, right? So
it will be suicide.
Exactly. It's a commercial suicide if you do something in that regard. But on the contrary, American government has done tons of things like this. They have done this before. They know how can it be done, and they know this can be done potentially in the future. So they're actually using their mindset. They're using their mindset
Joseph?
Yeah, we know that they've set up fake companies to create tech products that are not unlike what Israel just did against Hezbollah with the pagers. This is something that the U.S. mastered a long time ago that other nefarious governments have copied, and China has not taken that path, and certainly the Chinese companies haven't taken that path because they know it would be suicide.
But the United States assumed that China would do that. That's the problem. Anyway, it's not so funny, but it's getting really dangerous and ridiculous in my eyes. Many thanks to Josef, Mahoney, Gong, and Warwick Powell joining us for this special edition of The Point. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point, coming to you live from Beijing as usual. You can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Lixin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for joining us. You've got The Point.